All right, good evening. Welcome to another edition of Building the Scottish State. I have the great pleasure to have Matt Campbell with me today, convener of English Scots for Yes, my guest on several interviews at the SNP conferences over the past years. So first of all, thank you, Matt, for being with us this evening.
Not at all. It's Matt Campbell-Sturgess. I tend to drop the last part of my double barrel name, but during an election period, you have to make sure I get that in there. Otherwise, people might think there's a different Matt Campbell. I don't know. Is it that common a name, Campbell? Matt Potts.
Pretty common. You are a candidate for the Dumbarton constituency for MSP, and so tell us a little bit about your candidacy and what you bring to the table, and a little bit about the process whereby the candidates are chosen.
I'm a prospective candidate. The SNP have a bit like the primary system in America. The SNP have a candidate selection process. Prospective candidates put our names forward or are nominated, and then it goes to a ballot of all the members in that area. So in the Dumbarton constituency where I live, all of the members will get a vote on who our eventual candidate is, and I'm one of the 7 contenders for that candidacy. And then after that, obviously, we will then go into the election itself, where I'll be up against, if it's me, hopefully, I'll be up against Jackie Bailey, MSP, the Labour and current sitting MSP for Dumbarton. In terms of what I bring to the role, I'd like to think I bring experience and vision. I was an SNP councillor over in Greenock before I moved here 4 years ago. Yeah. And as you know, I also founded English Scots for Yes. And as an English person, I think I'm well placed to refute the sort of things that Labour like to slyly suggest about the SNP, like we're in some way anti-English. And I'm also, I think, in a good position to refute some of Jackie Bailey's assertions over Faslane, the naval base that's in my constituency area, because I served in the reserves myself as a Royal Engineer, so I've got a bit of a military background, not an extensive military background. Unfortunately, my eyesight got too bad to stay in too long, but I'd like to think I bring a bit of that to it. So I think I can face down Jackie and say, yes, I don't think we should have trident nuclear submarines, but no, I absolutely support our forces families, because we need them for defence. And when we're independent, in fact, I hope to see the Faslane and Cookport bases enlarged to take on their new role as the headquarters of the Scottish Defence Forces, and also bring a wealth of other experience as a councillor, as someone who campaigned in the referendum, set up a national campaign group. And another thing I think I bring to it is my familiarity and skills with the internet, which weren't really a big thing a few years ago, but now that we face a pandemic where traditional electioneering is going to be impossible, having someone that knows how to use social media may well be important.
I agree. Tell us a little bit about your background. How did an English, and you have a military background, and what brought you to Scotland, and why do you support Scottish independence?
It's actually what brought me to Scotland is why I left the reserves in the first place. Actually, I joined the reserves when I was in England, and I met my partner over the internet. And I visited a couple of times, and I left the reserves to come up here, to move here. And my plan was to rejoin, but when I attempted to rejoin, I discovered that my eyesight was just a bit too poor to allow me back in. Why I support Scottish independence? I support Scottish independence because I live here, and I want the government here to represent my views and the views of the other people that live here, rather than a party government in England, in London, that doesn't represent our views, forget Scotland exists until there's a problem or they want something, and haven't won elections here since the 1950s. So for me, the arguments around independence are ones of self-determination and having a country that's by the people that live here and have most to gain from good governance. So I think that doesn't really change whether you're born in England or born in France or America or anywhere. It's not about where we were born, but where we're going together as a country, which is incidentally the motto in Scots for Yes. I can't claim credit for that. We stole it from Bashir Ahmed, one of the later SNP MSP and the first Scots Asian to be elected to the Scottish Parliament.
Assuming you do become the nominee of the party and you do actually win, what do you see as your role in once you become an MSP? How do you see advancing the cause for independence and a referendum, et cetera? Let's go through a sort of a hypothetical scenario about what happens over the coming months that would enact a referendum. How do you see the next few months panning out?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, if I was honoured by the party to be our candidate and then subsequently elected, which I'd very much like to be, and I very much hope we will win the seat regardless of who our candidate is. I think I'm the best placed person to be that candidate. First and foremost, your role as an MSP is to represent the people of the constituency, regardless of who they voted for, fairly and equally. And that would be my first and priority. And obviously, to do that, to represent and better their lives and to better Martin as a whole and Scotland, I believe that we will need independence. So it will be to advance that case for independence. In terms of what I think was going to happen over the next couple of years, I think it's very likely that, assuming the SNP are returned to government with a majority in the Parliament, which I think we will do if people vote SNP. Obviously, if they don't vote for us, then we can't do anything. But assuming that we are returned as a government and hopefully as a majority, I think that one of the first things the returned Scottish government will do is establish a referendum on independence and advance that case from there. I think within a year or two of that election, we will start the transition to an independent state, and that will see us, setting up the architecture of a new old country, so a new country, and returning some of the powers to Scotland that are currently used in Westminster against our advantage. And that's going to, that's going to be the bulk of the next Parliament, assuming that independence can be done in that space of time and it's not delayed until after a vote is taken and then the rest of that Parliament. I think what will happen is the rest of the Parliament will be the setting up of the independent state architecture. To come back to the topic of this podcast, I think that's what the bulk of the next Parliament will be if we have that vote and we win. I think that the rest of the Parliament will be devoted to the setting up of that independent state and establishing the first elections of that independent country, which very much hope for me to be part of that conversation, for me to be part of that Parliament, and me to continue being part of that Parliament. I would very much like to be the first SNP MSP for Dumbarton and the last SNP MSP for Dumbarton, because there won't be an MSP after that. It will simply be member of the Parliament of Scotland, rather than the Scottish Parliament being subordinate to the Westminster Parliament.
Yeah, that sort of ties in with the first question. In a new state, how will the people make sure to get an equal say when the judiciary always takes over? How will we be equal under the law in a new state? I went to a meeting that was crammed full of lawyers wanting to write the Constitution for us. How do you see a constitutional convention which is much more all-encompassing? Because we don't, like in 1789 and in the U.S., it was mostly landowning oligarchs that got together and very secretly wrote the Constitution, and there was a lot of popular opposition to it, but it eventually did get ratified. But it was very much designed to run the country in the interest of those who owned it. And I've been involved in this process since 2011, trying to play a role. And one of my main motivating factors was not wanting to see it become just another corrupt oligarchy like the UK is now in the United States. What do you think can be done to, make sure that once independence is achieved, that Scotland doesn't just become a little mini Westminster, and that there can be genuine popular participation in real democracy in Scotland?
You're right. The Federalists and the Constitutionalists, obviously, the wrangling over the US Constitution. A lot of people think that the US Constitution dates from the same time as the Declaration of Independence, not realising that there's actually that period between where the Federalists wanted the difference in eventually the constitution that was adopted. In terms of why I think the UK is starting to go down that road of oligarchy and why the US is sad, I think that's more of an establishment over time that can happen unless constant reforms occur. Now, I'm not entirely sure what we can do to avoid that in future, but what we can do to avoid that at the start are to ensure that we have the kind of checks and balances that are lacking from the UK government set up, because we don't actually live in a democracy in the UK. I know that everyone likes to think it's democracy, but actually the UK is a monarchy. So we don't have any checks and balances against monarchical oppression, because, the monarch is the absolute sovereign of the UK. Although in Scotland, the monarch is not sovereign, the people are sovereign. But in terms of what we can do, I think that we need to make sure that when we establish a constitution, it has the checks and balances that stop Scotland into those traps down the line. And, making sure that there are democratic oversights for every stage of the process, and making sure that, our judiciary is accountable to the people, making sure that our parliament is properly accountable, making sure we don't have an upper chamber that's just completely unelected, and making sure that, that we don't end up in a situation like we see in the US, where party system revolves around who's got the most money, who's got the best lobbyists, and term limits are a thing. So You have people sitting in office for 30, 40 years that can't be unelected because, they're never going to lose the seat. That's the sort of situation that breeds oligarchy.
Before I got involved, I taught a class on campaign finance in the United States. And I mean, I had to go Ralph in the toilet a few times when I was doing research on it. It's just
when you say campaign finance law in the US, I picture a pasta machine and putting your head through it and turning it to spaghetti.
Oh God, it's even worse now. I mean, it was always bad, but since the 1970s, they had at least made some efforts to regulate it out, in the post-Watergate era. And so you had like hard money and soft money and these different limits on certain types of money, but that was just all wiped away after the McCain-Feingold of 2001.
Citizens United, wasn't it?
Yeah, that just obliterated everything. Yeah. There was absolutely no limits whatsoever.
I mean, we're not immune to that kind of thing in Scotland. We see lobbyists, although we have a much more robust system in the Scottish Parliament for dealing with lobbyists. And lobbyism. We have lobbyists in Scotland, and it's creeping into party selection where when we've now reached the point where the SNP is more likely to win a seat than any other party in certain places. We're now seeing contests which in the past were literally just a meeting where all the local members got together in a room, decided who the candidate was going to be. We're now seeing full-on selection contests. I'm doing videos and presenters in places there are candidates spending money, quite large amounts of money, to try and secure the selection. Mm-hmm. And because the election isn't an afterthought in those seats, but it's so likely that they can manage to win the seat that it's almost seen as an election in itself, which is very like US primaries. And I'm not very comfortable about that thing.
I completely understand. And that would be really interesting to, kind of now develop bills or laws to limit that. And I'd be more than happy to give any input into that, given what I've seen about it. But I mean, if we're already, even before independence, we're getting, the money becomes much more important in the process. That's not good.
Candidates here locally, I'm not sure if all of us have, because there was a couple of late developers here, but 3 of us for certain have said, we're going to agree to a spending limit. I think we suggested 50 or something, £50 of advertising locally in the Barton constituency, and we wouldn't spend any more than that each, because that money should be getting spent on an election. That money should be getting on the actual general election, on the SNP internal selection process. And I think that's the right thing to do. But to go back to the question about how do we make sure that everyone is equal under the law, and how do we make sure the judiciary don't come in and take over, I'd caution about seeing the judiciary in a bad role in this. If you're writing a constitution, you're writing the legal framework that governs a country. Having lawyers in from the start is probably a good idea. It would be like building a car without anyone that can do any mechanics. But you do need oversight there. And I think political oversight of the constitutional writing process will be vital, because we need that representation of the people, for the people, by the people, baked in at the base layer of that constitution, without having to then go back and amend it dozens of times. I mean, all constitutions get amended anyway, but the likes of the US Constitution, parts of it were amended 10 minutes later.
The first 10 was the Bill of Rights, because a lot of the states made ratification contingent upon the Bill of Rights being the first order of business in the first Congress, which in fact it was. And they've tacked on another 17 amendments since then, mostly broadening the franchise. 2 of them were prohibition and then repeal of prohibition. But when you think about it, I mean, we live in an age when that you don't have to amend it that way. I mean, before, if you tacked on an amendment, you can't change all of the Constitution's texts, especially in the 19th century. So they had to tack on amendments to the end of it to change what was in the original text. But in the original text, you still have the 3/5 compromise, which counts slaves as 3/5 of a person. You still have that just ridiculous electoral college system that was, again, dates from the slave era, to make sure that the
wealthy landowners in the South were, compensated.
Exactly, that they were balanced and they wouldn't be able, and the whole 19th century, where they would accept with the Missouri Compromise of 1820, where they accepted one slave state and one free state at the same time, which of course ultimately resulted in the Civil War. But my point being is that if we have a constitution like that I've developed, where you can, and we're going to put it, and we've also got a blockchain format platform that we're using for digital covenant.scot, whereby we can take the signatures, which are basically self-sovereign, it can be made into self-sovereign identities, and then we could have a genuine people's popular, blockchain popular participation in developing the Constitution. I mean, people are going to come up with different drafts, but if the end, that if there was a referendum, not whether to accept a constitution or not, but to vote on the constitutional drafts out there. So often it's been like, do you accept this constitution, yes or no? Rather than why not have it where there's several drafts that people can choose.
I do caution about some of that aspect. I mean, I'm down for direct democracy. The only thing I caution about is when it's something that's fundamental as a constitutional framework. My only caution is that, the peril of the masses there would be that, you might see minority interests or groups or persons, sacrificed to the will of the many there, whereas a guided process. It shouldn't just be like you say, do you want this or not? There should be much more feedback. But I do think that at some point, notwithstanding the questioner's concerns around the judiciary, I do think that we need them experienced legal minds to come in and say, okay, you can vote on this idea or not on this idea, but you can't have this because that's just not going to fly. That sort of thing is I think you need that experienced input. And then I think that each part of it should have a consultation ratification process. And I actually like the way that the Scottish Parliament's committee and consultation process sort of works in that way. Because the Scottish Parliament is unicameral, because we don't have an upper chamber, the committee process here is a lot more robust. And I think that's where you end up getting them views, because the consultation process for every Scottish bill virtually, feeds in a lot of information. And then you have the representatives of the people guided by the legal expertise of the judiciary, but ultimately the representatives of the people come in and say, no, that's a bad idea. That's just the courts taking over. Or, yes, this is a good idea. This protects these people's interests. And that might protect people that, might only make up 1 or 2% of the population, where if it was a purely direct democracy process, 80% of the population say, yeah, that's fine, we don't mind that. And the other 10% are going, that's not good for us. I think that would be the danger. So I do caution against that, notwithstanding my fondness for blockchain-based democratic structuring. We should probably move on to the next question there, though. I think it's about referendums and postponing them for COVID. The question is, when do you think we can go forward with a new referendum for Scottish independence? And it's closely tied to the next one, which is, I don't think COVID-19 should be used as an excuse to postpone a referendum. What do you think? I mean, I personally, obviously, any referendum bill that comes up before the Scottish Parliament, if I was selected and elected, yes, I would have a say on that. But in terms of the timing of a referendum and whether things get postponed because of other events, that wouldn't be up to me. I think that would be the up to the party that's in government, which will hopefully be the SNP. And I'm believing that post is currently not up for selection. So I don't think Nicola has anything to worry about from me in that regard. But in terms of where do I think that's going to happen, I think it's very likely that as I said before, if the SNP are returned as government or majority government in the Scottish Parliament, I think it would be within a year or so of the election, there will be a referendum, I think. Everyone kind of accepts that, without 58-60% of in the polls possibly are now in favour. In terms of, do I think COVID-19 should be used as an excuse to postpone a referendum? I don't think anyone's suggesting it be used as an excuse, but I do think that the pandemic, if we don't see a vaccine, if we don't see an end to the horror of the pandemic fairly soon, I think it will have an effect on the democratic process. But do I think that it should be used to delay, or that it should delay the referendum? No, I don't. I don't think that democracy can be delayed forever, just as we can't postpone and lock down the economy forever. I think that our democratic process will eventually have to move on regardless of what's happening with the pandemic. Hopefully, though, like I said, hopefully there will be a vaccine successfully soon. I think that's just how we have to go with that.
I was looking through the Scottish Reserve Bank website, and they have a very detailed timeline. And from what I understand, they have set the date for, I forget exactly what day in September of 2021. And so apparently, I mean, it looks as if they've got it planned out. And when the SNP manifesto comes out, do you know when that's supposed to come out, the SNP manifesto?
No, I usually, party man. I'm not even a candidate yet, so I don't think I'm on the mailing list for the but usually manifestos tend to come out, a couple of weeks, a couple of months at most before an election. So I imagine we'll be seeing one in March or April next year.
Okay.
I saw the stuff about the National Investment Bank. I'm not entirely certain, though, that you can conflate that with an eventual referendum, etc. I know there are currency plans underway. Then the National Investment Bank will be more about investing in Scotland and being used as a way to progress capital spending plans.
It's actually a detailed one about how the transition of the currency. And from what I understand, chatted with Gordon McIntyre Kemp, and he basically affirmed that it's very likely that the manifesto will include this basic framework, saying, okay, if the SNP is elected, the referendum will be on this date. So when people are voting for the SNP, they're voting for this plan, as far as I understand. I mean, I'm not privy to anything you aren't, so I can't confirm that. But it looks as if they've got it pretty well planned out. I think that they just have to wait to the right moment with regard to the Brexit things to make a move. But I really think before the end of the year, there has to be some kind of commitment made, because or else, especially as it's looking increasingly likely, there's going to be a no-deal Brexit.
Hopefully there isn't a no-deal Brexit, because that's the last thing anyone in the UK, in Scotland, or in the rest of the UK needs right now, especially with the pandemic. But I think this is one of the things we're just going to have to sort of watch and see what happens. And I know that as we go forwards, currency is probably going to be the number one issue, followed up by how will we finance the Scottish state, which is obviously uniquely tied to currency. And there's going to be a lot of arguments over components of MMT versus traditional financing, and that gets into the weeds a lot, because you get these ridiculous analogies about current accounts of people treating the country as if it's a regular bank account. Last time I went to my bank, I'm not allowed to mint currency. And they were really quite strong on that one. They really do not want you minting your own currency, whereas a country obviously has all of its own currency in most cases. So, I think these ridiculous analogies just don't hold up. So I think that the argument's probably going to be quite messy, but ultimately currency policy and stuff, that's something where the economists will be much more in control of the situation, much more guiding that discussion than people on Facebook arguing about, well, what if you've got this much debt versus this much deficit, not actually understanding what those terms really mean in the context of a country and currency adoption. So I think it's a complex topic that people don't tend to wrangle with very well.
As far as I understand it, of course, deficit is the difference between the money that comes in and as expended, but the way that they finance the debt, as I understand it, is to issue bonds. So, for example, the United States has treasury bonds that are owned all over the world. And then normally, if it's a 10-year bond, you give a certain percentage per year in return, and then you buy the bond back at the end. But the United States can just keep printing it forever. When they come up with the whole idea that like taxpayers uniquely finance the government is just absurd. They create as much currency as they want, whenever they want to, if they can find trillions of dollars to puff up the stock market during the pandemic without helping anybody, without actually helping any individuals.
Yeah, the current term that the UK government prefer is quantitative easing rather than printing more money, because else. We don't actually print the money anymore. It's just a spreadsheet somewhere. But the point about you're absolutely right. The US Treasury issues its bonds on. I think they're issuing a 250-year bonds at the moment. It's ridiculous, the idea that everyone's ever going to call them on those debts, and it doesn't actually matter. The supply of money, the liquidity, doesn't increase beyond the ability of the economy to service that liquidity. There are goods and services for that money to be spent on. It really doesn't matter how much a deficit in that instance is, although obviously, an independent country like Scotland isn't the USA. It will be smaller and thus will, need to be able to deal with other countries and service its debts in other currencies, which is where hyperinflation kicks in places like Germany pre-World War II and in other, Argentina in the 90s, where it wasn't the economy locally that caused that inflation. It was servicing those debts in the currency of the country to other countries. That's where, not to get into the weeds here, I think we are probably. But, that's where those sorts of situations occur. And when Scotland, in the Scottish context, we've got that huge oil and gas resource and the wind resources as well, and our trade and industry, portfolio with whiskey and tourism and like, we're actually going to have when we have our currency, we're going to need to make sure that it doesn't actually become too valuable, and then otherwise we'll face problems with import export stuff. So I'm not tremendously worried about that sort of thing, but people don't understand what deficit and debt mean in that national context. You ask the average person, where do your tax pounds go? They say, oh, to pay for spending.
Mhm.
No, they don't. When you pay government money with tax, you know this, you're nodding along, but the majority of people have no idea that when you give the government £100 in cash for your taxes, that money is gone. That money ceases to exist the moment it hits the government. I mean, technically it's paying down the debt, or right, but it doesn't exist anymore. The government create new money and then pay the servicing on that debt. So people don't understand these contexts at all. And to be fair, I don't understand them. Nobody understands them. They're that obtuse and out there in the clouds. So I think that them sort of arguments get dwelt on heavily in the media, and I think that's actually quite deliberate.
That's the role of the media, to keep the debate, within very narrow bandwidth and keep them arguing. Oh, I want to reduce taxes by 10%. Oh, I want to reduce it by 20. But it's deliberate. It's to keep the public apathetic and to just have controversy over really minimal things. I mean, when you watch talk radio, it's really interesting. I listen to James O'Brien quite a bit. He's a good talk radio, but they always frame it so narrowly. Are you going to follow these rules or not? It doesn't really get to the big issues. And yes, that's very deliberate.
I always like to confound that one. I mean, I was joking when I said it, but I remember at SNP conference, I think 2 years ago, the BBC were doing vox pops around the hall, and they go, "Do you believe that we should raise personal taxation or lower personal taxation?" And I said, I don't believe we should have personal taxation. I think we should just tax the companies, because people don't make money, companies make money, so tax it at the source and then don't bother individuals with it. I wasn't entirely serious about that, but the idea that I just think outside of that little box of raise or lower, which is what they wanted to talk about at the time, because the UK government were talking about, raising the personal tax, lowering the personal tax. You could actually see a head kind of, what? Oh, that's a very interesting.
That's absolutely.
They were trying to shut me up and get away from me, because it just didn't.
I'm sure it didn't make the telly. That's for sure.
No, I don't think so. And I do that deliberately, just to sort of jump out of their little framed box.
You stepped out of the bandwidth of debate, so you're not going to be heard. It's pretty simple. Going back to some of the questions from Duncan McCarrisher, if any of the candidates for the SNP in Dumbarton need to let members get to know them and not hide away, I've got a vote, and I've only had contact with 3 of them.
Well, I don't know if I've had contact with Duncan. I'm trying to reach out to all of the SNP members in the Dumbarton constituency. One of the problems, and maybe not every member is aware of, contact with members delivered by party rules. We're given 2 emails, and I've not sent my first email yet, and I'll send my second email later. I'm going to send my first email, I think, probably in the next few days, in the run-up to our hustings, lovely. And I encourage Duncan, if you're out there listening, Duncan, please come along to the virtual hustings. I believe they're on next Tuesday night, and you'll get an email from the Constituency Association in regards to that. I think it is an important point, though, because of the pandemic. If it wasn't for the pandemic, I'd be out knocking doors, but we're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to contact them deliberately in person or on phone them or anything. So it is actually a problem getting a hold of members, and I worry what that's actually going to do to our democratic process across the country, because and in the election as well, we're going to end up, I think, with representatives that a lot of their voters haven't actually had the chance to discuss matters with. But I'm here, so if Duncan wants to reach out to me, find me on Twitter, Math Campbell. You can go to my Facebook website, that's comment on Facebook, so he's obviously on Facebook, so you can find me, Math Campbell-Sturgess SMB. Reach out to the running Indie Live here, you'll be able to get a hold of me. I am more than eager to talk to you. Sorry, that was a bit of a personal plug there.
How soon could we get rid of Trident?
Well, I mean, Trident depends on us becoming an independent country, because defence is a reserved matter for the Westminster Parliament. So I'm sure Peter Dixon is aware. In terms of how soon could we get rid of it after independence, it's in my constituency. Faslane is just over there. So, it's something that's very dear and near to my heart. I want Faslane and Coolport, the 2 military bases here, to actually be growing after independence. Quite aside from Jackie Bailey's scaremongering about job losses, I actually think that more people locally after independence, because it will be the headquarters of the Scottish Defence Forces. In terms of how quickly that happens after independence, obviously that will depend on negotiations. In the run-up to independence, we will have to negotiate for our share of the military. We'll have to negotiate for what's going on with base, because it would, not only would it not be possible, it would be vastly irresponsible of Scotland as a new independent country to say, you've got 24 hours, get the subs out of here. We couldn't do that. It would be unsafe. There needs to be a decommissioning process. There needs to be a planned retreat for the UK government to quietly pack up its stuff and leave. In terms of how long that might take, how long's a piece of string? I think realistically, the Scottish government and the Scottish people wouldn't want a long process. And I would think we would want compensated for the amount of time that would take. And I think that that long process of them decommissioning and moving their submarines, I'd hope that they actually take the opportunity to say, yes, we don't need nuclear weapons anymore. Let's just get rid of them. I suspect they probably won't. That's entirely up to them once we've left the UK. Their defence policy is their own. But I think that 3 to 5 years would probably be realistic. 10 at the outset, but I'm speculating and guessing here. It will depend on so many factors, negotiations and compensation for Scotland for tolerating these illegal, immoral weapons in our waters for the minimum amount of time possible. But that is actually my answer. It will be the minimum amount of time that we can physically reasonably ask them to get out. That's really the matter. Someone else asked there, incidentally, Trident is the elephant in the room, but how do you think America will react as it is their baby? Well, I mean, ultimately, I don't think America will care particularly if the UK government's keeping Trident and keeping buying them weapons from America. I don't think they'll care where exactly they store them. I think that's actually a very good question, and I'm going to continue talking. So sorry, Mark. But I had quite a few chats with a friend of mine who's in America, Will McLeod. He's a journalist from Virginia, and he's spoken on this. He's got friends on the Hill, and they've said, actually, we don't care whether the UK government has Trident or not. We don't care if they're nuclear power or not. We've got enough missiles to wipe the face of the earth clean. What we care about is that the UK can meet its NATO, commitments. So if independent Scotland means that the UK government abandon Trident and put their military spending into actually paying for troops to have body armor and, able to deploy on a moment's notice and, making sure that their combat regiments are ready to go, I think that they would actually welcome that far more than, whether they renew Trident or not. And I think that independent Scotland, we will need to uphold our military commitments, which will mean people have talked about, if we go to the Trident, we can spend that money elsewhere. And I will spend some of that money elsewhere, but I think we will need to face up to the fact that an independent Scotland will need defence forces. And those defence forces will cost money, and we should use that money wisely to properly patrol the Greenland, Iceland, Scotland gap, to make sure that our peacekeeping forces are able to deploy and are properly equipped for, whatever contingencies they need to be facing around the world. We, in Iraq and Afghanistan, we saw people saying, our troops don't have body armor. I think that's scandalous. We spend an awful lot of money on defence in Scotland, and yet we don't actually have much to show for it other than an illegal, immoral weapon that we can't use and shouldn't want to. So I think that's quite a good question now. And I've been talking for about 2 minutes constantly there, so I'll stop and take a breath.
Going back to an earlier one about Boris Johnson shutting down the Scottish Parliament on the 1st of January, I don't see it going that way, but they are setting up a parallel administration in Edinburgh. And rather than shutting it down, they would probably, I'm sure that they're seeking to basically take over. And it's in the internal markets bill. You have provision for this. And in the past, as I was growing up with my dad, who was Scottish but very British as well, but there was this, the British, they know how to run an empire, and they were competent administrators. And of course, many of the Scots, including my grandfather on my father's side, was in the merchant marine to India. So obviously the empire is a big part of that. But there was a real, a genuine respect for the competence of the British civil service, and whether they were doing good or not, that was irrelevant. At least they were perceived as extremely competent and effective. That's not the case anymore. I mean, when you see Boris Johnson and that's just vaporized. I mean, any kind of respect for the civil service.
The telling thing about that is, Boris Johnson is I'd said this about Theresa May. I'd said Theresa May is the worst prime minister the UK's ever had, and Boris Johnson is worse. It's like they're on a downward slope to ever more incompetence.
Just what I'm saying is that we're living in these times when you basically get, Rupert Murdoch having more influence over who becomes prime minister than the entire UK electorate, let alone Scotland. And it's really scary, the fact that he's Michael Gove, Sarah Vine, all of these kind of media government figures, and of course Dominique Cummings, and they're just so much more unpredictable. I mean, the British state was predictable before, but now it's just so completely off the rails.
Yeah,
it's hard to include anything.
It's a zany madhouse of a zany insanity of people that have no competence and no business being there. A phrase, I think it's from the deep south in your homeland, when you see a turtle upside down on top of a fence pole, you've no idea how it got there. It's got no business being up there, and nobody knows why it's there in the first place. I think in terms of the danger, the question that Kevin on Facebook asked, what will happen if they just try and close the Scottish Parliament on January 1st? Well, A, they're not going to. B, they're not going to. And C, I don't entertain hypotheticals that I don't think have any basis in reality. However, I do accept the wider point that the UK government are clearly on a march to try and steal the powers of the Scottish Parliament. They wouldn't close the building down, but they will gut the powers of it. So slowly over time, there's a Scottish Parliament, and it doesn't have control over it. Oh, sure, they're not taking the powers away. They're just controlling all the and keeping all them powers in London, so you can't actually do anything about it. I think that is actually a valid concern. I'm very deeply worried about that. I think that the answer to that is electing a strong SNP majority in May next year, and us drafting the independence referendum legislation and taking that step to being independent, because I think there is no alternative now. Before, in 2014, I think there genuinely was the possibility, at least, that there could be some form of federalism. I didn't think it was going to happen, but I thought it was a possibility that it might, if the Labour Party got back into power, they might see it as their only way out of constantly losing elections in Scotland, to give us some form of federalism and just, leave us alone at that point. But now the Tories are, fully employed. Said that Boris and his pals are running the asylum down there, and there's no chance for Scotland's future to be positive unless we take that step to be independent. But I don't think they're going to close the building on January 1st. I think that would cause mass civil unrest, and I don't think it's realistic. Even Boris isn't quite that stupid, but I might be wrong. But I doubt it. I think that's not very realistic.
Do you see emergency election called before the new year or early January? Can the Scottish government dissolve itself and call an early election?
Yes, but it requires 3/4 of Parliament to be in favour. And no, I don't. I don't know if they might be thinking of the UK government. Like, would the UK government dissolve before January because of?
I'm pretty sure you meant the Scottish Parliament, but but as you said, if it takes the 3/4 of the things, that's certainly not going to happen.
Curran on Twitter, I want to just
go ahead, take it.
It says, "I'm deeply unhappy and uneasy about what Matthew Campbell-Sturgess is saying about getting rid of fighting and decommissioning nuclear weapons and mass destruction as long as 10 years completely unacceptable. I had a candidate vote in this constituency, so I don't just deal with it." Well, first off, I said I think it's realistic say 3 to 5 years. I think 10 would be the absolute outset. But what I said was that it's up to the Scottish government and in negotiations with the rest of the UK government, whatever we call them, the former UK government, to do so safely. I think that how long they should stay is the absolute minimum to legally and safely remove them. I do not want to see Trident in Scotland a day longer than is necessary. I think that we can't expect them to kick them out after 24 hours after independence, because that just simply wouldn't be safe. And the last thing anybody should be wanting in this situation when we're talking about nuclear weapons is to suggest an unsafe course of action. However, I think realistically we'll be talking 3 to 5 years, because it's not just safely removing them, but also making sure they have somewhere to take them to, so that they don't end up in a dangerous situation where, it's not up to us to decide where they go once they leave Scotland's waters, but I think that we have to be mature and sensible and say, how long is it going to take to remove them safely? You've got that exactly that long and not a day longer. I think 3 to 5 years would probably be.
I think 2 years. 2 years is reasonable.
It includes building a facility to house them. If they've got a facility that can house the actual, the weapons, and they can do that safely, for instance, in America, because the fighting system is interoperable, then I would absolutely be pushing that we ask them to do that and say, yeah, you can safely take them to the United States and store them there for 2 years, or however long it's going to take to build a base in, somewhere in England. Then do that. But you've got exactly that amount of time. My point was, I think that we should accept that we were going to have to keep them for a little bit after independence, but that time period should be literally as long as it takes for them to safely remove them, and not a single second longer. Not, we'll let you keep them for 10, 15, 20 years. No. I think realistically we'll probably be, talking 3 to 5 years. But if we could do it in 2 years, then I'd be happy with that. I'd be happy with a day. But I think realistically we can't ask that. So my issue is about safety, not about some sort of lease agreement or something. No.
How many?
They can stay here as long as they need to safely remove them, and not
right. And particularly, how many kilometers do you live from Faslane?
Kilometers, I have no idea, but we're about 2.5 miles. I can look out my window.
That's like 5. That's like
so believe me when I say that I don't.
Yes, I think you have a particular interest in them being removed safely. That's for sure.
Yeah, I understand Peter Curran's concerns that I could be unhappy if the candidate was suggesting, yeah, sure, take 10, 20, 30 years. We'll make money off the lease. I heard someone suggest that, and I was aghast at the idea. Are you kidding me? No, get out. Take them away as soon as you can, but as soon as you can safely. And that's the very important point I was sort of stressing there. I think people have some unrealistic expectations that, if we declare independence on a Monday morning, by Tuesday, that the boats will be sailing down the Forth of Clyde away from Scotland. I'd love if that was the case, but realistically, I don't think we would be mature and sensible in suggesting that.
Okay. Very interesting question. I mean, is about what your vision of a Scottish military is. What would it be like? What should it be like? I mean, because there's always this tendency.
Here we enter the part of the show that I will come to regret when I'm the Scottish Defence Minister in 20 years' time.
Look forward to it.
Someone posts this as a recording. Please don't. No. Obviously, it's not up to me. I'm not the Scottish Defence Minister. I'm not going to be the Scottish Defence Minister if there's not going to be a Scottish Defence Minister until we're independent. And I don't think I would be in the running for that job just yet anyway. So it's not up to me. In terms of what I think we will see or what I would like to see, I would like to see Scotland taking on the military role of peacekeeper and living up to our commitments as a mature, independent country. So I can see us going to be looking somewhat more like Denmark or Norway or Ireland in that respect, defence forces rather than a Navy, Army, Air Force, Coast Guard. I do feel particularly strongly that we should have a semi-military Coast Guard in the same way that the United States does. That doesn't mean that we have a Coast Guard that has guns and stuff. What I mean by that is that at the moment, the UK government privatised the Coast Guard in the UK. And those pilots and, that fly their Coast Guard helicopters aren't military anymore usually. So they're civilians, so they can't operate in sort of environments that sometimes are necessary. So I think that a militarised or semi-militarised Coast Guard would be an important step for independent Scotland.
At least when you say at least in the sense of it being in public hands, rather than private.
Yes. I think the US model is actually quite good for that, because in times of war they have obviously a military role, but the rest of the time they have a civilian role, but they are seen as a military service or semi-military. They're seen as a kind of almost a police force or law enforcement, but with a rescue aspect. I'd say something more akin to the fire service here. So that's kind of the role I'd like to see our Coast Guard taking with enlisted personnel and, clearly defined roles, because that could also then encompass like fisheries protection and, border patrol as well from Scottish waters to stop smuggling and the like. I think that would be an important thing that the Scottish military could have, because we will have to have a pretty good navy, because our waters are immense. We have a huge coastline to protect from, trafficking of humans and illicit substances and, all sorts of other issues as well with the Coast Guard, and search and rescue being one of them. So I think that would be an important step for an independent Scotland military. In terms of other things, that's something for the bird. That's something for other people with much more learned experience. I was a reservist. It's not like I was a general here, so I don't have a keen military mind perspective to bring in here.
Well, I think your experience would lend itself to at least giving a view on kind of the basic posture of a military. How much?
I think that the vast majority of Scotland would like to see a military that doesn't tend to involve itself in overseas conflicts quite so much. Particularly not ones that are, against the United Nations resolutions of the time. I think that in terms of where our military will go in years to come as an independent country, which I'm sure we will be, I think that we will need to uphold our peacekeeping obligations as a mature independent country. And I can see that us taking on a role much like Denmark, for instance, does. In terms of what our assets and infrastructure may look like. Obviously, I'm going to be advocating that Faslane and Coulport are not only kept but also enlarged and seen as the headquarters, the natural headquarters for an independent Scotland defence forces. Because we won't have a Navy, Army, Air Force sort of structure. It will be one defence force, but with such a large maritime area, with the Greenland, Iceland, Scotland gap control, clearly the waterborne, the marine forces of that defence forces will have to be, the top level of it. They'll have to be the bulk of it in some way. So I think that Faslane is an actual place to have those forces. well, call for it as well, I should say. And I think we'll have to enlarge the basis for them to do that. So I definitely see a role for an enlarged Scottish Defence Force. And bear in mind at the moment, I keep saying enlarged because at the moment we spend an awful lot of money on defence in Scotland, but not very much of the UK's defence forces, defence infrastructure is actually in Scotland. We don't have any surface fleet to speak of, bar a couple of minesweepers that are kept at Basel, but actually based around the world. We have the submarines, obviously, but we have one major airbase. We have a couple of army barracks. It's really quite minimal compared to the amount of actual money. You were looking at just an expenditure level of how much we spend versus what we've got. We're getting ripped off. So I think after independence, we'll have a lot more defence forces to deploy in Scotland and house, and we're going to have to build some bases.
Okay.
A long answer. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. And what do you see as the? I've been kind of gaming this in my mind ever since the Brexit vote in 2016. But what would happen within 5 or 10 years? And I at the outset I had predicted that it would pretty much be the end of the UK. It was like lighting the fuse on the UK, and that Scotland would be independent, Ireland would be reunited, etc. And I'm wondering what. My view is that I'm just wondering, maybe I'm dreaming, maybe I'm being too utopian, but that the European Union, obviously they have to have plans in place for a no deal Brexit. I mean, they know that UK as well as anybody, and how the Johnson government has zero integrity and can't keep, is completely corrupt, and can't keep their promises. But at the same time, of course, they have to maintain the integrity of the European project. But I mean, it's always been kind of my dream that, like, once it was clear that no deal Brexit was inevitable, which we'll know really soon. Within days, I would think. And then that Europe would say, hey, Scotland, if you want to, if you want to become independent, we will recognize you, and you can remain in the customs union market. And after you get independence, we'll find a way of getting you back in. I don't think there's any doubt that most of the Europeans would love to have Scotland as an independent member state, but they have to go through this. Hey, how do you see it? How do you see Europe? I mean, because technically Scotland hasn't left the single market yet, but it's on course to.
Yeah. If a transition deal that's going to run out. Yeah. The stroke of midnight, it will pop and cease to exist, and we'll be left with holding the pumpkin. It's very confused mice. To extend a very poor metaphor. In terms of what I think
I didn't quite get it, but anyway.
Cinderella, stroke of midnight.
Oh, gotcha.
Pumpkin being Boris Johnson, presumably. I think the wider argument about what will happen after independence, again, a lot of variables. In fact, I'm not, Nostradamus. I don't have a crystal ball, and if I did, I don't think I'd be using it for predicting the European Union stance on Scotland. I think I'd be using it for next lottery numbers. But in terms of what will happen, I think realistically, the European Union would love to have an independent Scotland. Would be very warmly welcomed. You see some of the unionists on Twitter and like screaming, "Oh, Spain don't want Spain don't want Catalonia and the Basque region to suddenly go independent," and wouldn't want to do anything to encourage that to be the case. But I think that Scotland going independent in a non-unilateral form, no unilateral independence declarations, but an agreed Scottish independence method occurring, I think Scotland would be welcomed into the European arms with open arms, the European Union with open arms. In terms of how I foresee that happening, I have limited, prognostication abilities. I don't know exactly the form that will take. Obviously, there will need to be negotiations, and then there will need to be an admittance process. I strongly suspect that would be a very abbreviated process. We wouldn't see like the sort of situation that happened in the early 2000s with the admittance of the previously Soviet nations being admitted. I think there'll be because of the very reality that Scotland's legislative functions. We've been an EU member for 30 odd years. Our legislative arrangements are already European compatible, so I don't think it would take much to admit it. There are finance and currency questions that will need to be answered. I suspect that will make up the bulk of the independence referendum debate going forward, so I'm not going to kickstart that right now. But in terms of what will happen after that, I think that the European project is important. I think it will go forward. I think it will have to be adapted and changed to reflect the UK leaving. but I don't think it's going to end in any conclusive way. I'm more concerned with our relationship with the rest of the UK, the former UK, after independence. I think, people have asked us about, there's going to be a hard border with England. So, well, no, I don't think we have to have a hard border with England, because, there's going to be a situation in Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement requires a soft border in Northern Ireland and the Republic. And I think whatever arrangements are eventually come to there can equally be doubled here with Scotland and England in the border there. So I think that's a much more interesting question. I think realistically, we're going to end up looking at quite a lot like Ireland. Mm-hmm. And, that's not a bad thing. Ireland did very well out of the European Union, arguably a lot better than it would.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's an interesting question I want to quickly tackle.
Please do. And then we'll, after you answer it, then I'd like to wrap up and just you can give your election spiel and with the voters and shamelessly pander to voters as much as you want. So
I'm reminded of the spitting image thing with Neil Kinnock. Vote for me, your babies love them. Vote for me, Neil Kinnock. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to pander to people. There was a question here. What do you think happened to that sub that was on fire the other day? Has there been any update? I want to very quickly say there was not a fire on the submarine. There was a fire. There was no fire on a sub. What was happening there was, many of your viewers might not be aware, that sometimes when they move the subs from Faslane to Coolport, they have to go around the Gairloch, which is what the picture behind me is. And they have, sometimes when they do that, they do it what's called a cold start. They do it on diesel power, and obviously diesel emits fumes, and that's what the steam was. It mostly steam, to be fair. That was not a fire. There was no danger to anyone, absent the usual danger of moving, umpteen nuclear weapons around our waters. The nuclear weapons are driven up to Scotland for the subs. Surely they can be driven back, and you are just left with the subs. That's not entirely accurate. They're driven up to Scotland, but they're also driven down to England and then back again. They live in, well, they don't live. They're kept in Scotland. They're taken down to England for routine maintenance, because nuclear weapons don't just sit on a shelf somewhere. They have to be maintained and kept in very safe conditions. And part of that maintenance, then I believe in Aldermas down in England, and then they're driven back to Coolport, which is where they're kept, and then they're put on the submarines, which is why Faslane, the boats go from Faslane to Coolport like we did the other day. In terms of that, I think that that's part of the process. They will need to develop a place to keep them in England, or they could possibly use, I believe it's Norfolk in the United States, to permanently house the Trident missiles whilst constructing somewhere. So that's part of the negotiations that will need to be taken place during our independence process, to decide where they're going to get kept until they've got a permanent place in England. I suspect the UK government will want to keep them here whilst they're building somewhere in England to keep them, or possibly Wales. And I think we could probably argue that they should keep them elsewhere. For instance, they should maybe talk to the Americans and keep them there. But that's for a later discussion. But they can't just be driven down to England and get there. There's no way to put them at the moment. Nowhere safe anyway. You were wanting me to wrap up, I believe.
Yes, please just
please vote for me. I'd ask any Dumbarton Constituency Association members, which includes, the Vale of Leven, Helensburgh, my own part, London North, and Dumbarton itself, to consider giving me their number one vote, because I believe as 5 years as a councillor, running English Scots for the SN National Campaign, which we founded in 2013, there's a huge group spread across the entire country, and it gave me quite a lot of media experiences where you met me, I believe. I think that gives me the experience to become an MSP and to run a campaign effectively against Jackie Baillie, but also as someone who's English and someone who served in the reserves, I think it nullifies two of the main arguments or main attack vectors that Jackie Baillie and the Labour Party like to use. A suggestion that somehow the SNP is anti-English, but categorically, demonstrably is not. When you've got someone like me as a candidate, I do not sound Scottish in the slightest. And as someone who served in the reserves, I think it blunts her arguments around the SNP hate the military. Well, we don't actually. We don't want Trident anymore. But I'm full. I stand fully behind our forces family. My neighbours are in the Navy. I'm a former reservist. I think that them two aspects, make me a very good choice to be our candidate, because we absolutely have to win the seat. Labour are going to throw everything they can at this. It's their number one target seat in Scotland to keep, with Jackie Baillie, their deputy leader, running for it. So, I think we need a very strong candidate who can rebut all of Jackie's lies, has the experience to do so, has the experience of being a candidate, can work a campaign in a social media network that we're going to find ourselves because of the pandemic, and has that background of being, in my case, English and former military reservist, to take up and nullify some of her arguments from the get-go. And I'm aware I'm speaking very fast here because you've got to cut off. So I think
you can take a couple extra minutes. You can take a couple of extra minutes if you want.
Oh, hey,
we're not on the BBC. Don't worry. We can run over time, no problem.
Well, that was one of them mouth speaking things. I spoke very fast there. So apologies if any of your viewers had trouble following that spiel.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Are there some other points you wanted to make before we wrap it up? I mean.
Oh yeah. I mean, in terms of the candidacy, I think we've got some very strong candidates here in the bottom. I much like to, ask for people's number one vote for it. If they've already picked a candidate that they want to back, it's a single transferable vote. So consider giving me your second vote, because that might come. If they pick someone that doesn't succeed and falls out of that race, then obviously their secondary vote will contribute to someone else. And so if they're not going to vote for me, then I'd ask to give their second vote. In terms of the other issues, I've got a vision for Dumbarton that includes building up our local health services in the Vale. We focused a lot on the military, but we need more. Jackie Bailey likes to make an issue of a local hospital there called Vale of Leiden Hospital. She always goes on about saving the Vale as if it's constantly under threat, which it categorically is not. But I'd actually like to on building up the Vale more services and reopening the accident and emergency that Jackie Bailey helped close in 2004, I believe, or 2006. More local facilities, more things locally, because the pandemic has shown us the wisdom of having local provision for these services. And also, big part of this, the three issues that are going to affect this election are Brexit, independence, and recovering from COVID. We've covered independence and Brexit quite a lot, but I think the recovery from COVID, I'm going to be pushing some motions at Party Conference hopefully this year on trying to end the empty units problem, where a lot of our high streets have empty shops, full of empty shops. I want to bring in some form of taxing mechanism to persuade the property owners and developers that own those empty units to let them out, if necessary, at a peppercorn level, or they're going to get taxed heavily to, for the privilege of having an empty shop unit. And also a similar thing on second homes, holiday homes, and Airbnbs to stop the empty villages problem, because a lot of the places, particularly in the Highlands, but also out here, where I stay, in the more rural part of the market, we have entire areas where there are just no permanent residents because they're all Airbnbs or second homes. And the ones that aren't Airbnbs and second homes are let houses that have been bought by big property owners and, have been let out for scandalously huge rents. So I think we need to do something to control those situations, to be able to bring more young families in. We have depopulation problems. I think that the policies I'm pushing there on, second home ownership, Airbnb stuff, and private rent controls would maybe help ameliorate those effects and bring in more young families, bring in more population to those parts of my constituency. And again, like I said, also maybe trying to help recover from COVID a bit as we incentivize property developers, shall we say, to bring in more local entrepreneurs running small shops and businesses. That's a big spiel as well. So apologies, and if you've stuck with us this long, well done, guys.
Well, on that note, unless there's anything else that you'd like to add, just thank you so much for being with you. Be delighted
to have you for having me.
And I am interested in working with you over time to try to maybe develop some bill, not only on the constitutional issues but also on something dear to my heart is again campaign finance. We got to make sure that Scotland doesn't just become another oligarchy from the day one. I'm
also keen to work with you on online voting and blockchain voting. We didn't discuss today.
Oh well, I'm more than delighted.
It's both our hearts.
We can talk by Zoom or Skype anytime. I mean, I've got just a few classes. I've got lots of spare time, so be more than delighted to talk to you.
Life of an academic.
Just an English teacher.
So it was great being on your show. Anyway,
absolutely a pleasure. And let's get back in touch. And thank you to all your viewers for your questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but all of them were well appreciated. And hopefully, when you're back, you can answer them. You can answer
absolutely. Happy to come on anytime.
And feel free to contact Matt directly by he mentioned earlier his Facebook and Twitter. He's very open. On that note, thank you very much, and we'll talk again soon, I'm sure. Okay, bye bye.